Hotline Miami, a game all about receiving cryptic phone calls, killing Russian mobsters, and blood. Lots and lots of blood. Now, if you've ever seen this game, even once, you know that it pretty much revolves around violence. But what I'm here to talk about today is how Hotline Miami subconsciously exposes the capability of human violence by using animalistic imagery. It shows us that when it really comes down to life or death, us humans are no better than savage animals, even if we pretend to be. So the first and most obvious mention of this is the animal masks used. Of course, this wouldn't be a Hotline Miami video without talking about Jacket and his iconic rooster mask. Now, Jacket himself is a Vietnam Army veteran, and we see him killing in the name of revenge for his friend, whose only known alias is Beard. While doing all these crimes, he wears this same mask. However, throughout the game, the significance and symbolism behind this mask begins to unravel. Now, there's a lot of mystery behind Richard, which is the name that the Hotline Miami community has assigned to the secretive identity which is personified by the mask, and so there's not really a singular truth behind his character. So take what I'm about to say with a bit of skepticism. My idea behind Richard is that he's some sort of higher power in the Hotline Miami universe. He dons the persona of Jacket's mask, mainly because that's the most common symbol we see throughout the first game. As even if you collect every single mask in the game, you'll always start off a level by selecting the mask you want to use, and the first mask you see is Richard's. My theory is that he acts as an audience member for the events of Hotline Miami. His existence transcends the actual events that occur in the game, as he can appear to whoever, whenever, and thus acts as an outsider to whatever occurs. The events of the game are essentially driven by the player, who continues to play the game, continues to kill countless of people through the hands of the various in-game characters, and continues to further the plot until the final ending. And so, Richard sort of acts as this fourth dimensional being, as on multiple occasions he speaks directly to the player and not the in-game characters. The question of do you like hurting people is a direct jab at the player, forcing them to consciously become aware that they keep feeding into the cycle of mindless killing. Because at the end of the day, the gameplay of Hotline Miami is what keeps the player hooked, with the story pretty much acting on the side. This puts Richard in a position of interacting with the player's conscience, planting the seed of doubt in the player's mind, which in turn has them questioning their own sanity whilst playing the game. The game itself, when you're playing as any of the characters, has this sort of neon color palette and the badass synthwave / techno soundtrack playing in the background. These aspects desensitize the player to the violence they're committing, turning off their brain and tapping into the primal enjoyment of killing without consequences. Yet in moments such as the lonely walk back to the start of the level, or the small intermissions with Richard's dialogue, we as the player are forced to think about what we've just done, the lives we've taken, and the bloodlust we just felt. It is a moment for the player to reflect on their sanity, and if they wish to play just one more level, to quench their animalistic power trip. The player knows there is no happy ending to be had, no redemption for any of the characters, yet instead of quitting, the player revels in the chaos, choosing to descend further into the spiral of death that Hotline Miami offers. And well, this is reinforced by the hard mode intro in Hotline Miami 2. All the important characters are seen sitting around the table, taking a momentary break from the relentless killing they've been forced to do. Assuming that the player beats the game, takes a break, and then comes back to play the game on hard mode, this meeting kind of tells us that these characters only get a break from killing once the player chooses so. And thus, with the return of the player, us, they are forced to repeat the events of the game over and over again. The last conversation between Richard and Beard shows the knowledge that Richard has over the game world, as he says that he wishes him and Beard could have met under different circumstances, where they're not living in a cycle of endless death. The foreshadowing and advice that he gives the characters in the game, such as telling Jacket in the first game that he should look for who's actually behind the 50 Blessings phone calls, indicate that he himself doesn't enjoy or thrive on the endless cycle. Despite his overarching presence, he feels compassion for some of the characters and pity for others. For example, he comforts Richter during his last moments and advises Evan to stop his search for the truth behind 50 Blessings, as he knows he'll never reach the truth. Richard has lived through this cycle countless times before, knowing the inevitability and futility behind trying to stop the nuclear warfare.
Give it back!
No!
I said give it back now! Noah!
Larry, what the hell are you doing?
You can't just...
The fans are the next bunch of masked killers that we play as. Idolizing Jacket, they follow in his footsteps, attempting to attract the attention of 50 Blessings, and receive phone calls much like Jacket did, hence why they're named the fans. Now, each member of this group wears a different mask. Mark has a bear mask, Corey has a zebra mask, and Tony has a tiger mask. And Ash and Alex each wear a swan mask. Now, I'm not going to analyze the meaning behind each mask because realistically they could have chosen any animal, as it wasn't one that was assigned to them by the 50 Blessings group. They just chose it by chance. But I want to focus on the fact that they were in the military, and actually you can see them without their masks during Beard's missions. Now, unlike Beard's squad, they're members of the D Company, a platoon that fought in the Hawaiian conflict, facing heavy losses, with pretty much the fans being the only survivors of that group. Now, it's interesting because I like to see the story of the fans as the alternate ending to Beard's story. As in, Beard could have just as easily became a masked killer like the fans, yet chose not to. I believe the fans act as the result of untreated war trauma. They became animals for the war in order to protect what little humanity was left, yet upon returning, they're unable to fit back into society, retaining their animalistic qualities which they now fully embrace. The thrill they get from killing is the only way they know how to live now, and gaining inspiration from Jacket, who also came back from the war and started killing Russians, they can live by Jacket's example, hiding behind the animalistic persona that they've created. The masks act as barriers, to conceal both their humanity and identity from the real world. It shields them, allowing them to live in the headspace of their respective animal, both literally and figuratively through the use of their mask. Next is good old Jake, the overly patriotic American with an insatiable thirst for Russian blood, who, to contain his sheer power, only attacks with his right arm for some reason. Seriously, I never understood why. Now, Jake is a pretty two-dimensional character. He's meant to represent the bigotry and ultra-nationalist members of hate groups that blindly listen to their nation without question. In this case, he's depicted as the players who learnt nothing from the first game and didn't heed the messages and warnings of blindly following the 50 Blessings organization, which represent the various nationalistic organizations that exist today. In Jake's case, he dons a snake mask, which I see as a sort of reference to the Ouroboros snake, a symbol of infinite consumption and creation. Here, Jake's consumption is a metaphor for his thirst for Russian blood. In the sense, he sees them as scum, as subhuman, and as such has no problem killing as many as he can, since he's been brainwashed to believe that he's serving his country and doing a favor to the rest of the world by killing as many as possible. This, in turn, has the creation of even more tension between the US and USSR. Now, the interesting thing is that Richard never shows up for Jake, which I think signals that Jake is more animal than human. As in, there's nothing Richard could do that could wake Jake up from his delusions, as he had them long before he was contacted by 50 Blessings. So, Jake is pretty much a lost cause that just gets used as a pawn by 50 Blessings, and is a disposable asset that they exploit to do their bidding until they deem him a risk of exposing their operation. The ironic thing is that in the ending, which Jake gets captured by the Russians, he actually remains loyal until the very end, refusing to expose anything about the organization. The snake mask is an expression of Jake's unyielding desire to fuel his hyper-patriotic beliefs and ideals. He voluntarily joins as an agent of 50 Blessings, entering the cycle of carnage, believing he's doing his country good, when in reality he's acting like a traitor, hence the snake mask, as inevitably his killings play a role in the nuclear warfare that breaks out, devastating America and killing countless of US citizens. Next up, we have Evan, the only character who consciously tries to be a pacifist, resisting the urge to kill. For this reason, he's a breath of fresh air in a game like this, where the idea of killing is ingrained in each character for whatever reason. His involvement in the story stems from his obsession with writing his book on the 50 Blessings organization. Again, being the only character that exhibits a purposeful choice in choosing non-violent methods of attack, when he just as easily could be killing them, shows the humanity he possesses, where others have long since lost it. Ironically, although playing as a pacifist yields the player more points, it is incredibly more difficult to take specific care in not killing anyone. But for the sake of curiosity, what were to happen if we, the player, push Evan beyond his ethical boundaries and force him to kill? Now, ironically, he ends up killing the first enemy he encounters, but we can actually learn a lot from that. First of all, we see that he kills the man accidentally, as he checks his pulse and even attempts to revive him, yet to no avail. We see the panic on his face, realizing he's just taken a human life, and subsequently, we even see him try to yell for help once inside the Russians' clubhouse. However, what about when the player themselves forces Evan to kill? Initially, he's reluctant, using only the force necessary to incapacitate the enemy, but nothing beyond. He ignores the first command, resisting the animalistic calling that beckons him to take a human life which, just simply moments before, threatened to take his. If the player persists, however, Evan will give in to this suppressed desire, bashing the enemy's skull into the floor again and again as it cracks and breaks more with each repeated hit, coating the floor with blood. Unlike other characters which only persist until the enemy is dead, the player is given the choice to continue beyond this point. Considering the player acts as an extension of the character's free will, we see that Evan, despite having the most civilized approach to dealing with the enemies on the surface, deep down he's worse than many of the other characters. When he kills, he loses his sense of self, turning into a ruthless and savage version of the once composed and moral exterior he represented. This idea is further linked to the reveal of his inner beast, as upon killing for the first time, the player's screen gains a red tint, indicative of him being consumed by primal instinct, resembling the phrase "seeing red" when someone is overtaken by anger. As well as that, Upon his second player-driven kill, he takes off his jacket, revealing a muscular physique below it. This can be seen as a figurative device to represent the action of a snake shedding its skin, and thus effectively being reborn. In this case, Evan is reborn as the monster he held within him, a savage with no remorse to killing, while possessing the physical capabilities to exert this pain upon others. No one and nothing will stand in the way of him finishing his book. Although not strictly canonical, the player can choose whether Evan goes to the extent of neglecting his family in order to pursue his obsession with his book, showing just how engrossed he is into this vast rabbit hole of murder, to the point that he potentially falls victim to it, murdering people himself and thus becoming part of the problem. Now, just a small mention on the Henchman. We see his story when it's pretty much at its end. He's done years of work for the Russian mob, eventually becoming essentially the right-hand man of the Sun. However, the day comes where he wants out, and he's sent on the final mission of his criminal career. The ironic thing about this is that it is on his last mission that he makes a fatal mistake. He shows mercy. He reveals a sliver of humanity despite the hardened and rigid personality he's developed throughout his years of work. He abandons that for one small moment, perhaps in an attempt to leave his past life on a good deed, signaling the start of a new and peaceful beginning. He lets his guard down, and unfortunately, he pays the price. The fans, or the predators we can call in this case, make their way to kill him, toying and mocking him in the process while savoring the moment of his death. As to them, this is all just good fun. The henchman is eventually killed, despite his pleas for mercy, as unlike him, they've fully embraced their savageness and revel in it. Again, in their world, it's kill or be killed. The Sun, however, is a very complex character. We see him fighting to restore the legacy and reputation of the Russian crime family, being the leader of the gang after his father's death by the hands of Jacket. He is one of the most skilled killers, having no empathy towards his victims whatsoever, mainly because they're Colombians, which are the predominant gang that rivals the Russians, and not because he's racist. At least, I don't think he is. Anyway, he's probably one of the most skilled characters in the game, single-handedly managing to take down the entire Colombian mob in just a few levels. Considering this, you'd think that by the end of the game, he'd be thriving. Well, yes and no. In terms of business and infamy, he's made it. Miami's criminal underworld is once again controlled by the Russians, and the legacy of his father has been restored. However, his crippling loneliness leaves him vulnerable to the excessive use of the Russians' new product, a type of drug which has similar effects to LSD. Now, the Sun is seen using these from time to time throughout the entirety of Hotline Miami 2's story, yet he overdoses on them only after completing his quest for revenge. Now, I find that pretty interesting because it shows a different side of him. Perhaps he had a death wish, rationalizing it by putting himself in these impossibly difficult scenarios, all in the name of restoring the Russian crime family's reputation. All his levels are incredibly difficult, and although gameplay-wise it makes sense as they're towards the end of the game, we can interpret it as him wanting to die, and finding an excuse to put himself in scenarios which would make that happen. I mean, think about it. Who robs a whole ass bank in broad daylight expecting to get away with it alive? I mean, he ends up doing that, But for a guy as smart as him, it doesn't seem like a fully fledged plan that avoids any potential risk. I mean, the number of times I died on that level pretty much proves that. Either that or I just suck at the game. But the point is that he does have suicidal tendencies at the very least. By the end of the game, he's achieved everything he's ever wanted, yet he has nowhere else to go. He's lost the Henchman, a man that he regarded as a good friend despite his mantra of not getting attached to anyone. He has no family to pass down the business to, and all he has left is the now monotonous lifestyle of crime. So he decides to overdose on the drug mentioned prior. It's a similar story to Scarface, and if you haven't watched that movie, I highly recommend it because it has a lot of similarities to the game. Anyhow, in this drugged up state, the world around him starts shifting, transforming into a more primitive and jungle-like environment. His imagination begins running wild as he envisions all his men eating and cannibalizing on each other. Three-headed dogs and generally just exaggerated and demonic representations of anything that resembles a human being. Now, funnily enough, this also includes the fans, as this mission also takes place during the mission where the fans invade the Sun's headquarters. During this stay, every member is personified as the mask they wear. Mark is seen as a huge bear, Corey is seen as a lightning-fast zebra, Ash and Alex are seen as a large mutated swan monster with two heads, and Tony is seen as a gigantic tiger, charging out of his den to attack the Sun. Which, by the way, if this is how the Sun perceives the fans, I'd be shitting myself. So clearly the Sun is built different, since he pretty much deals with it like it's nothing. Now, as badass as the Sun is, figuratively he pictures himself in the jungle. Now, this might be a subtle nod to the fact that, although not confirmed, the Sun might have actually been in the Russo-American War, the same one that the fans were also enlisted in. This is evident by the assets used for the trees and foliage being identical to the ones present in Hawaii during the war. However, the fact he envisions this during an acid trip says a lot about his deep-seated nature. Now, I've never actually done acid, but typically during these trips, people will hallucinate and create realistic illusions based on repressed fears and desires. Now, this actually matches perfectly if we assume that the Sun has war trauma of some sort, which he has since buried deep within himself. On top of that, however, we also see him taking down the demonic forms that he's created based on the fans' masks. Through this, we can see that he views himself as the apex predator of his own domain, reflective of his inner desire to control the criminal underworld. The use of animals to establish this idea feeds further into the Sun's lust for power, as he defeats beasts which are equivalent of inhuman beings, showing that he has manifested his fears into a tangible form, that being animals, in order to physically and thus mentally defeat them. By doing so, he has achieved all he's wanted. He's restored the legacy of his father's empire and conquered his fears. With this, he walks the Rainbow Road, a symbol in Nordic mythology which represents the link between our realm and Valhalla, a resting place for noble warriors, which is what the Sun can now see himself as. However, as we find out, he actually ends up falling off the roof and leaving the Russian mob without a leader, causing it to inevitably fail and become a shell of its former self. Martin Brown, or the Pig Guy as most of us probably know him, is a character I won't touch too much on because it's really not clear who or what his role is in the story. He's the character we play as in the tutorial, and essentially he's simply an actor for the movie Midnight Animal, which stars him as a masked killer, similar to Jack here. The movie is pretty much capitalizing on the infamy that Jacket's masked murders gain, meaning that all the murders that occur in the film are fake, right? Well, that's what we don't know. My idea is that Martin Brown is the player, a man who thinks he's an actor, merely satiating his animalistic desires by acting on them in a way he believes is harmless. The player, similarly, exerts violence throughout the game, pretty much releasing their feral tendencies in the world of the game with no consequences in real life. Richard, appearing in Martin's dreamlike state, questions his sanity and his actions, with Martin justifying all he does by stating it's just a film. An excuse the player would make, justifying all the violence they're committing simply because it's just a game, it's not real. But the impact on the human mind from this violence is very real. Our brain registers what we're doing, yet justifies it due to the lack of consequence behind these actions. It's similar to killing an ant. You don't think twice, mainly because there's billions of them on Earth. One less isn't gonna have the slightest impact on anyone's existence, so you don't feel any remorse or regret. Even children that kill them for fun can justify this by saying that there's so many more of them, what's killing 100 or 1,000 gonna do in the bigger picture? As such, Martin Brown represents the player, depicting them as a pig via his mask, a stereotypically dirty animal that when given the chance will feast on dead humans. Much like us, the player, taking away human lives in the world of Hotline Miami, while feeling perfectly justified to keep on doing so, mirroring the phrase as greedy as a pig, as we can't help ourselves from coming back for more and more violence. Manny Pardo. In his case, there is no humanity to question. We first see him as a detective, attempting to solve and identify the killer behind various murders occurring throughout Miami. As it turns out, he himself is the one committing these murders, and essentially he's investigating himself. The reason he does this isn't to cover his tracks, rather the opposite. He wants people to know these murders are happening. He thrives and yearns for publicity for his depraved and inhumane actions. He has no reason to kill, other than to quench and satisfy his psychopathic desires. He kills in order to fuel his own ego and gain publicity by the media. We see that publicity is truly the motive behind all these human lives being lost, as time and time again, he attempts to convince Evan to stop writing about Jacket and instead cover the Miami mutilator. It is this desire for recognition as a monster, as something subhuman, that motivates him to keep on taking human lives. The constant chase for attention leads him to perform increasingly more gory and elaborate murders, toying with his victims and displaying them almost like art pieces to the public. The idea is that Pardo has stooped even lower than an animal is, as he kills not to protect, not to satisfy an ideal or a promise, but simply because he wants people to know that he can and will continue to get away with it. He blends into society like a wolf in sheep's clothing. In this case, he dons the persona of a man who follows and enforces the law, essentially acting as a savior of the city, when in fact he's a demented killer with no regard for human life. Even Richard, which essentially acts as some higher power that constantly questions the morality and true desires of the character and player themselves, cannot understand Pardo. This possibly indicates that Pardo has no conscience and simply operates from his psychopathic desires, as he shows no sign that what he's doing is affecting him in the slightest. He's truly beyond reason and redemption. Lastly, we have Beard, a character which in the first game is only seen as a manifestation in Jacket's memories, and ironically turns out to be the most content and at peace character in the entire Hotline Miami timeline. This is surprising considering in the second game we get a look into his experience as serving as a soldier during the Russo-American War. He isn't bloodthirsty, nor does he find enjoyment in killing. In this case, he's been forcefully placed in a kill or be killed scenario. And as all of us would, he is adapting to this, slowly building resilience against killing, with the hope of returning home to live a normal life. He is essentially pressured and forced into acting like an animal, having to willingly remove all his humanity from himself in order to survive in an environment where humanity is a weakness, and anything remotely close to that is considered a death sentence. Adding to this is his surroundings, a jungle that encompasses and entraps anything in it. This environment, housing animals that can't be distinguished from humans, are a rather compelling force for Beard to turn himself into one. It's a similar idea to Far Cry 3's Jason Brody, where by immersing himself in the jungle and embracing its beastly responsibilities, he slowly turns into a beast himself, becoming the ultimate predator to both humans and animals. However, unlike Jason, Beard is able to control this, essentially suppressing it to perform the unspeakable acts he must commit in order to survive, yet never losing it along the way. This is most evident during his final mission, Casualties. Towards the very end of the mission, a bomb goes off, mortally wounding Barnes and Jacket. This comes as a shock to everyone, including the player, and in this life or death moment, we see Beard's humanity prevail. He picks up Jacket, risking both their lives to save him from certain death. He isn't forced to do this. I mean, Beard is the only one who's unscathed. He could have just as easily ran away, leaving his squad members to die in order to guarantee his own safe return and the realization of his dream. However, his own ethics and belief that humans are innately good invokes a greater force in him, a force beyond himself and his desires. It is in this moment that Beard puts humanity over himself. Time and time again, he's killed out of necessity, yet we can understand that he still believes in the value of companionship. He does not simply kill for himself, rather he kills for a better future. Upon successfully rescuing Jacket, they await rescue, having barely escaped with their life. Jacket profusely thanks Beard, with Beard simply stating, "No need to thank me, kid. It's on the house. You would have done the same for me, right?" This right here is the epitome of Beard's character, summarized in one quote. He is a true human at heart, someone who believes in the idea that we as a society are together. He believes that even in a time like war, human decency still exists, not only within himself, but within every soldier on the battlefield. Because at heart, we always have a choice of whether we decide to turn into animals or not. I think the use of animals in this game is to send a message of sorts. Perhaps it's to show the human capability of violence, that all of us have these savage behaviors entrapped inside us, and that with a situation as desperate as the ones shown in game, we can unearth these suppressed animalistic tendencies that evolution and civilization has since made us forget. It wants to show us that we're animals at heart, We all want what's best for us. We all want to protect those closest to us. And we all prioritize our own lives at the expense of others when it comes down to it. We're survivors at the end of the day. And when you push a civilized and tame human being to their limits, there's no longer room to consider society. You push a person far enough into a dark corner, and you slowly realize they're not a person anymore. The darkness has consumed them and spat out a thing far worse than an animal. One that will ensure everyone feels the same fear, pain, and torment that it felt. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've stuck around until the end of the video, I really appreciate it. This video took me way too long to make, but I really want your advice in the sense of what you thought of the video. If you like these kind of extended, longer videos that, you know, run like for half an hour, and if you'd want to see any other game be analyzed in this much depth and, you know, with this much time being put into it, please let me know. Subscribe if you have even a second to spare, and I'll see you in the next one.